Today we're going to discuss something that might sound tedious, but important nonetheless. Let's say you've been building out your home lab, building out your network diagrams, labeling all of your hard drives, taking notes on how to install and configure Windows and Linux, and how to configure your containers and services, diagramming your cluster, and even how to restore your system in the event of a failure. And so far, your notes are scattered all over the place, either in the cloud in some note-taking app, in a private or self-hosted Git repo, or even on your local machine in a notepad file. No judgment here. And while it's great that you have all this, you want to centralize your notes into something you can access from the web. You want a good-looking, easy to maintain, and blazing fast site. A site that's simple, that doesn't require databases, comments, or updates. One that looks good, because we're not designers, nor do we have time to learn HTML and CSS. We're investing that time into home labbing. One that's ultra secure because there's no administrative backend or database to manage. And you want one that scales from 0 to 100 if needed. And you want one that is cache friendly so your pages are served very fast. One that lets you focus on writing plain text content and transforms that into a modern looking website. You also want the option to host this in your home lab or even host it in the cloud for free on your own domain. Well, I've got good news for you, because this unicorn does exist, and it's a static site generator. Since so many of you have asked how I built my documentation site, I've decided to share how I built my site and how you can create your own. My docs site and all of its content is open source, and it's using an open source site generator named Jekyll made by GitHub. It can be used to generate a blog, marketing page, a business page, a photo gallery, an event site, or even a documentation site like we're going to do today. We're going to set up a new Git repo with our soon-to-be documentation site. We're going to apply a theme that matches the one that I use on my GitHub documentation site that is clean, minimal, supports dark mode too. We'll then customize the site and start to create some content. We'll then create our first post and watch the changes happening in real time with a preview. And then we'll talk about how to deploy this to the cloud using GitHub Pages. But if you're allergic to the cloud, we'll also discuss how to build and host it in your own environment at home, because you might want to keep this safe within your home lab without it being public. And speaking of home lab and hardware, if you're considering building a new PC or even expanding your ever-growing home lab, you should look no further than our sponsor, and a huge thanks to Micro Center for sponsoring this video.
If you're thinking of building a new PC, you should look no further than Micro Center. If you've never been to Micro Center, you're missing out on seeing a huge selection of technology in person. They've got everything for custom PC builders, from SSDs and hard drives, to power supplies, to memory, to air and water cooling, to motherboards, to video cards, to processors, and more. Micro Center is your one-stop shop to totally customize your next PC build. And don't worry, if it's your first time building a PC, they have lots of helpful and knowledgeable staff that are there to help you out and will point you in the right direction, so that you don't attempt to apply thermal paste like this.
Also, Micro Center has been generous enough to give a free SSD to all new customers and is available in-store only. So be sure to see the link in the description for details. So you want to open up your terminal and install a few dependencies. And like always, you can follow along in the documentation, and my documentation is in the description below. After we have our dependencies installed, we need to install Jekyll. But there's an excellent starter out there that gives you the same exact theme and all of the features that I have in my documentation site. I'm using a theme called Chirpy, and I searched for days trying to find a theme that did exactly what I wanted it to. I wanted one that was clean, minimal, supports dark mode, has good SEO, and has search built in. And Chirpy has just that. So once you're here, be sure to star this repo, because this maintainer has put a lot into this theme. And they are very responsive to both bugs and features. So be sure to give them a star. So once you're here, we'll scroll down to step 1, creating a new site. So we're actually going to use his Chirpy starter as a template to create our own repo. This is really awesome. So if we click on this Chirpy starter, then we can choose a repository name. Now, if you're going to use GitHub Pages to host this website, which is free by the way, and has good availability, you'll want to name it a specific way. If you're not going to do that, you can name it anything you'd like. But if you are going to use GitHub Pages, or think you might in the future, you may as well name it this. So it's going to be your username.github.io. And you could choose whether or not you want to keep this public or private. So now it's creating our site based on the template and creating a new repository for us. Right here. Awesome. Next, we'll want to clone this repo onto our own machine. And then once we clone it, we'll want to go into that repository. And then I'm going to open up VS Code. It's a little shortcut to open up VS Code. Just type code and space dot, and it will launch VS Code for you. So once we have VS Code open, we can see we have a site, but it doesn't really look like a site yet, but it really is. It really functions as one. But before we can run it, we'll need to install dependencies for this site. And that's as easy as just typing bundle. So bundle is going to pull down our dependencies and should run really fast, and then we're ready to go. And after we load up our dependencies, we can load our site. Bundle exec Jekyll space S. So this will serve it out on our local machine. And you can see here, it's serving out on localhost 4000. And if we open up localhost 4000, we can see our website, which is running and looking pretty good so far. You can see it kind of looks like my documentation site. We have an avatar, a place for an image, our name, the name of the site, a title, home where our posts are gonna go, categories, tags, archives after we create some posts, about section, and then light mode, and then back to dark mode. And then we have ways to connect on social down here and an RSS feed built in. And you can see the search function up here. So right away, we have a pretty nice functioning site, but it's pretty bare bones. This is a good skeleton and a good foundation to build the rest of our website on. So let's do that real quick. Let's customize some of this. So if we wanted to customize global settings for our site, we would go into this config.yaml. So in this config YAML, we'll see some site-wide or global config. Here we can change the base URL, set the language. We can set our time zone. For me, it's America/Chicago. And this is important for posts, so it can calculate the offset. Here we can set the title for our site. We can set a tagline. Then we can set a description, which I'm going to set to the same thing. We can set our URL. This is kind of important because this is the URL it will be hosted on in the end. If you don't know, you can leave it blank until you figure it out with your domain name, but I'm going to set it to the repo name that we created earlier. Then we can set things like our GitHub username if we like. We can set our Twitter name if we like. For social, we can set our full name. You could set your email address if you like. I'm not going to set that because I'm not going to share via email, but I'll show you where that is here in a little bit. And then again, we can set our Twitter username and our GitHub username. We have some Google Analytics settings if we like, and you can set the theme mode to light or dark. I'm going to keep it to the system settings or whatever people change it to be. If we're using a CDN for our images, which you may not be, you can set that here. Then we can set an avatar icon. Now you can set this from a local file within the site, or you can set it from a remote file, like your Twitter profile, which is typically what I do. So I will plug mine into there. And then you could choose whether or not you want to enable commenting. So it supports commenting systems if you like. I'm not going to enable those at all, but it's really easy to enable if you'd like. Especially if you're running a public site or a blog and you want some engagement, you can do that. But mine's a documentation site and it's staying internal only, so I'm not going to enable any of that. But it's super, super duper easy if you want to. So let's scroll down. All of these can be configured, but most of them don't need to be because there are a lot of settings in here for Jekyll. But after you've looked them all over and set them, let's save these settings. And let's go back to our site now. And if we refresh this page, here we go. We can see our site updated. Now, if it didn't update for you, just stop the server that's running in the background and start it again. So I've noticed sometimes when you're working on the config file, you have to stop it, then start it again. But when we're working on posts later on, you don't have to do that. I think it has something to do with the global settings and not wanting to refresh. But anyways, if you notice that your site isn't updating, just stop the server and start it again. So this is looking pretty good. So I have my image here, I have my title, I have a tagline or my description, and then I have home, categories, tags, archives, and about. And you can see here that GitHub is configured and Twitter is configured, and then my email is configured if I wanted to. And then we have an RSS feed, which is pretty cool. It automatically creates an RSS feed as we create content. So speaking of content, how do we create content? Well, let's go back into here. So if we go back into here, you'll notice that we have this folder called posts. Inside of this folder is where we're going to create our content. See, here's the cool thing. When we create content, we're actually managing our content as code. Now, I know that sounds kind of scary, but it's actually really awesome. We're going to write our content in Markdown syntax. So Markdown is a syntax that allows you to add special annotations so that when it generates markup or HTML, it can transform them into good-looking web pages and style them. So let's create our first post. Let's call it hello homelab.md. So you want to make sure that it's an MD file or a Markdown file. Now all of your posts need to have this header here, so this title, so we can generate the appropriate metadata for the post. But I'm setting the title as Hello Home Lab, I'm setting a date, and setting some categories, and we saw those earlier on the site, and then setting some tags. And you probably know what tags are, but the important call out here is that they should all be lowercase and separated by commas, so basically like an array. Then we can start to write our content. So in Markdown, if you want to create an H1, you would just put a pound or hashtag, depending on what generation you're from. You would use the pound or hashtag sign, and then write a title, and then start to write your post. And the really cool thing about this is if you're using VS Code, you can actually preview your Markdown too. If you click on this open preview on the side, we can see I'm getting a preview of my content on the other side. So if you're unsure of how to write Markdown and want to make sure it looks good before you push it up, you could preview it on the right. So I have an H1. If I wanted to change it to H2, I'd add another pound or hashtag. You see it move to an H2. Add another one, H3, H4, H5. Pretty cool, huh? So let's go back to an H1. Hello and welcome to my Home Lab doc site. And I'm just gonna copy in some lorem ipsum rather than you see me fumble and try to type a couple of paragraphs. But let's add some content here. Then we'll add an H2, then some more lorem ipsum. Then we'll add an unordered list, as you can see there. If you add asterisk, it's an unordered list. Pretty nice. So let's add some code blocks. I add code blocks to all of my documentation. 1, because it looks good. 2, it's easy to copy and paste. And 3, you get really nice formatting. So if you want to add a code block, it's just tick, tick, tick. I usually hit enter, then tick, tick, tick. Then I go back up. Next, we describe the language we're going to write. And this is for syntax highlighting. So let's say, for instance, I was going to write JavaScript and I write console.log, hello world. You can see over here on the right, it understands the syntax and we get syntax highlighting. So pretty cool, JavaScript, pretty cool. And we could do the same thing for everyone's favorite markup language that is named YAML. Say tick, 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 YML, and then tick, tick, tick. And if we add a YAML block in there, you can see we have a nice formatted block of YAML. And let's say, for instance, we wanted to add photos. We can embed an image like this and it will render the image for us, so pretty cool. Now I said we were gonna make a good looking site and this is pretty okay on the right, as you can see. But it's pretty basic and it's not styled. That's because it's just generating the markup for us from this Markdown. But remember, we're using Jekyll to style and make this look really good. So let's actually save this. Let's go back to our site. And if we refresh this page, we can see our first post. So here it goes, looks pretty good. It says, hello home lab, that's the name of our post. We can see we get some additional metadata here. So created 3 days ago, that's due to my date, how long it would take to read this post, what categories it falls into, and then it's also generated tags for us. So if we click on categories, we can see it generated categories for us, and the same with tags, and it actually created an archive for us too, so pretty cool. As we create posts, it'll create a timeline showing all of our posts. And then if we go into home and go back to this post, here it is, looks pretty good. So here's our post in long format. As you can see, our code blocks get formatted really nice. They look like a terminal here. And we also get this copy button here, which will copy it to our clipboard. And you can see that YAML is highlighted and JavaScript is highlighted with syntax. And real quick, if you're doing code blocks of terminal commands, when you do tick, 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 you can either use console or bash. It'll both work. I should probably just show you. Let's do that. So if we wanted to do a terminal command, we would say bash here. I typically use bash. You can use terminal or console, I think, but I always type bash there. And we could say sudo apt update and then sudo apt upgrade. We save here. And if we go back and refresh, now you can see that we have a shell command with syntax highlighting. So pretty cool, pretty cool. Now that you have a way to create your content, we should now probably start hosting this. So I mentioned earlier, we have 2 ways of hosting this. We can host this on GitHub pages for free and push it up and they'll host it for us. Or we could host it on our own machines, on our own servers. So let's start with GitHub pages first, and you can see how that works and how easy it is. Then we'll move to hosting it ourselves. So to host this on our GitHub site, we're already done. Seriously, it's mostly done for us. So here's the cool thing, this author already created a GitHub action for us. So if we look in our GitHub folder, we'll see a GitHub action, and this is called pages-deploy. And we can see here that this is going to do something. So on a push to the Git repo, it's going to build our whole entire website. So it's going to ignore some paths, and this is a good thing, so it doesn't build unnecessarily, but it's going to use Ubuntu, check out the code, and run a deployment script. And this deployment script is actually going to compile our website, not really compile, but convert our website, and then push it up to GitHub Pages. And that's really all we need to do. So before you do this, you'll have to decide if you're going to host on GitHub Pages. If you are going to host on GitHub Pages, awesome. I actually do. For my backup site, I host to GitHub Pages and I host internally in case internally that goes down. But you can host on GitHub Pages for free. You'll just want to make sure that your site is public. But before you do that, you'll also want to make sure you don't have any secrets or passwords or anything in here. And you shouldn't be committing those to code anyways. But check to make sure that your repo is public, and then we'll commit these changes and push them up to GitHub. So I'm going to change the visibility of mine because it was private at first, but I'm going to make this public, then I'll confirm, and now my repo's public. So the next thing we need to do is actually commit this code and push it up to GitHub. Now you could do this with VS Code or any other tools, but I'm going to use a terminal, and it's pretty easy to do. Do a git status first to see changes, then we'll do a git add to stage those changes. We do a git status now, they should be green, so these files are staged, and then we're going to commit and give it a comment. So after we give it a comment, we can commit, and then we're just going to do a git push to push it up to GitHub. After that it's pushed up, then if we go into our repo, we can see it's there. Now if we go into GitHub Actions, we should see that this workflow is now running. So GitHub Actions is GitHub's CI and CD workflow. And we can see that that one action that came with our kit is already running. So this CD step is going to set up the job, check it out, set up dependencies, deploy, and then post-checkout is probably just clean up. And if you've never done CI or continuous integration or CD and continuous delivery, congratulations, you just did it. And congratulations, you've just done DevOps too. We've actually built and deployed this out to our web servers. Albeit they are GitHub web servers, but we have CI and CD running and deploying code automatically. Congratulations. So how do we see our site? We'll need to do one more thing. We should go back to our site and then go to settings. Then we'll want to go to pages. Then you'll want to make sure that the branch selected for the source for your pages is GitHub-pages, so GH-pages. That's a branch on this repo, and choose save. Make sure you press save. And then it'll tell you your site is published at this URL. Then after going there, you can see we have our website, and this is hosted on GitHub right now. We can see all of the content we just created that's being hosted. We can see our tags work, our pages work, archives work, and everything else that we set up. Now, if you want to make changes to the site, all you have to do is exactly what we just did. Create a page, push it up, and in a few minutes, it will be live. The cool thing about this is too, if you host on GitHub, you can actually CNAME this to your own domain. So if you own your own domain, you could CNAME this to mask the domain. So when people visit your domain, it's actually loading from github.com, which is pretty awesome. You get a highly available site pretty much for free from GitHub. But if you don't want to host in the cloud, I totally get it. I have things in the cloud and I have things in my home lab, in my Kubernetes cluster, and in Docker. And that's totally fine. So if you want to generate your markup for this, it's really easy. All we have to do is type in this command in the terminal. So this is Jekyll env, setting it to production. That's an environment variable, so Jekyll knows, hey, build in production mode. And then bundle exec Jekyll -b. And if we do that, it's going to build the site locally and output it to a folder. So if we look in our output, we should have a site folder. And in this site folder is all of the content it just built. So we have our index page with HTML, we have our feeds, we have some JavaScript, we have a 404 page, and everything. If we look in our post, we can see our Hello Home Lab post, along with an index.html, and all of our content. This is what's great about Markdown. We wrote Markdown here, and it generated all of this markup for us, and it made it look really nice. So what do you do now? Well, if you want to host it just on a web server with Nginx or Apache or anything else, you basically copy the contents of this site folder into that server and load it as your default page with index.html, and you have your web server up and running. But if you want to run it inside of a container, which I recommend, you could run it inside of your own custom Docker container, something that runs Nginx, and use that container to serve out these web pages. And I have a video on how to create a custom Docker container. Super easy, very short, and shows you how to create a custom Docker container. But if you don't want to do all of that, I'll include a Docker file as well as the CI for both GitHub and GitLab inside of the documentation. So you can just copy and paste that as well. But I highly recommend, if you're interested in building custom containers, check out that video. And then after you put that content inside of your container, then you can spin it up in Docker, Kubernetes, or wherever you host your containers. So really, that's all you need to do to host your own documentation site. But it doesn't have to be just a documentation site. And it doesn't have to be this theme either. And it doesn't have to be Jekyll either. There are many static site generators out there that'll help you create good-looking websites with minimal effort. So we have a super fast and super secure web server in just a couple of minutes. So I hope you learned something today. And remember, if you found anything in this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
We've been getting warm days and we've been getting cooler days. Today, cool, cloudy, 54. Like, I couldn't ask for a better day. This is my kind of day where I can put on a hoodie, wear pants. you know, I normally wear pants, but there are days I wear pants and there are days that I'm happy. So, but today's one of the days where I can wear pants because it's nice and cool out.